Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. I'm Brian Morgenstern here with Sam Lyman. DeepSeek, rattling some markets and rattling some cages here in the US. Trump has issued an AI and crypto executive order, two different executive orders to spur competition and light the US economy, uh, put a light under its rear end. Lots to discuss here. Oh, and New York Magazine calling Trump supporters a bunch of racists. What an original attack. Good Lord. Sam, where do we start? Oh, and a new White House press secretary. Great news. Where should we start today?
Yeah, so much to unpack this week. Let's start though with Trump's crypto executive order. Brian, I think it feels like it was just a couple years ago that the White House was trying to implement a CBDC, use debanking to eliminate crypto companies, and issuing executive orders to limit or eliminate Bitcoin companies. Because in fact, it was just a couple years ago. Under Joe Biden, we lived in a completely different world as a Bitcoin company. It was a cold and bleak world. And I feel like Joe Biden was somewhat of the Jack Frost of crypto winter. Crypto winter is bad to begin with, but when you have a White House that's trying to destroy the industry altogether, it's even worse. However, we are in a completely new era with President Donald Trump. And one of Trump's first orders as president was to issue an executive order on crypto. And he was right there with the AI and crypto czar, David Sachs, when he signed this executive order. Can you play that clip for us, Dylan?
This is the crypto EO. We're going to be forming an internal working group to make America the world capital in crypto under your leadership.
Which is really going up, right?
Absolutely.
All right, David, that's for you.
Thanks, sir.
There we go. The crypto executive order that we've long been waiting for. The executive order that, as David Sachs said, intends to make the United States the crypto capital of the world. So, Brian, to start today, let's unpack what exactly is in this crypto executive order. What did you find that was most noteworthy to you?
I mean, there's a lot in there. A couple of the main points I'll start with. Creating a working group with government leaders, including heads of some of Trump's agencies, to get together and talk about what a market structure should look like. That means defining commodities and securities, or just mere collectibles, like akin to a digital baseball card. And then defining jurisdiction on who regulates these things. There's clear rules of the road. This is a huge departure from the prior administration, especially the SEC, which engaged in such hostile regulation by enforcement. So this sea change is very welcome. They're looking at stable coins and how to regulate those so that U.S. debt markets, I think, will be even more liquid than they already are, and it'll help strengthen the dollar. They're also looking at a strategic digital asset reserve, which my personal opinion is that it should be a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because it's the only truly decentralized asset with a supply cap with skyrocketing demand. I think, and will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. There's other countries looking at this. There are many U.S. states looking at Bitcoin strategic reserves. So I think it makes sense that the U.S. government look at it as well. Hopefully that will happen quickly. The Trump administration has already revoked SAB 121, Staff Accounting Bulletin. That was the bulletin from the SEC that made it nearly impossible for financial institutions to custody digital assets for their customers. The banks wanted to do this. The customers wanted to do this. There was no reason not to do it except for this totally irrational hostility from the prior administration. So that is huge. He is telling the U.S. government not to have anything to do with a CBDC. Thank goodness we're not going to have some dystopian digital dollar where the government could control the way people spend their money. We're going to let the private sector flourish in terms of how people custody and transmit assets. There were There are a number of things in here. What did I miss? I mean, that alone is just such a huge win, such a huge sea change, protecting people's right to self-custody their assets if they want to. I mean, this is transformative and really exciting that President Trump wants the country to be a leader in this. I think the Biden administration was exactly wrong on all of these issues, and Trump listened on the campaign trail, and now he's following through. Promises made, promises kept.
Yeah. Like this is exhibit A of that exact phrase. And Brian, you covered just about everything. Maybe one other thing to point out is if you pull up that next graphic, Dylan, ending Operation Choke Point 2.0. There's language in the EO that says that it intends to protect and promote fair and open access to banking services for all law-abiding individual citizens and private sector entities alike. So, Brian, I know we'll have a lot more to say on that later in the episode because you'll have a lot more to say to the country about that exact topic next week. More on that in just a little bit. But yeah, it was a truly historic executive order. It shows the mainstream moment for crypto in the United States and in the DC policy world. So really exciting times. And I want to dig deeper into something you mentioned though, Brian, about the national Bitcoin stockpile being rebranded as the National Digital Asset Stockpile. Can you pull up that next graphic as well, Dylan? So that is in the second pin right there. The working group will be tasked with a federal regulatory framework governing digital assets, including stablecoins, and valuing the creation of a strategic national digital asset stockpile. So this really sent waves across Bitcoin Twitter because back in July, that's when Trump first floated the idea of what sounded like a strategic Bitcoin reserve. He called it a national Bitcoin stockpile. Now it seems that digital assets might be thrown into that mix. And I understand that Trump, he wants to be a champion of this industry, and that's the industry is very grateful for that. But at the same time, I think there's a real argument to be made that the stockpile should be Bitcoin only because of all cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin is the only digital asset that has gold-like properties, that has the gold-like adoption that physical gold has. And I don't see a case to be made that Dogecoin should be included in a national digital asset stockpile. No shade on Dogecoin. Congrats to everyone who bought that way early on. But it's hard to make that argument. Brian, I'm curious your take on the national Bitcoin stockpile versus national digital asset stockpile debate.
Yeah, my opinion is that it should be a Bitcoin stockpile because it's governed by rules, not rulers. Nobody can change the supply cap. Nobody can create new Bitcoin out of thin air. It is not, I think for others trying to get involved in this, it's more of a marketing gimmick. For Bitcoin, it is about sound money principles, and it's about giving the US an asset with a hard cap and unlimited demand. I think Bitcoin is a strategic asset for the country. I think others are not. I will weigh in for a second on this, the Twitter traffic we've seen about Ripple and XRP, because people are accusing Ripple of pushing for XRP to be included in the stockpile. I think the CEO of that company basically confirmed that. And now is sort of crying mercy because Twitter warriors are attacking him. Over the past number of years, Ripple has been working with WEF, trying to become the main CBDC vendor of the world. The ownership there controls, I think it's like half the supply. They could conceivably do some kind of a fork and change the supply numbers. They spent years attacking Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, sending protesters every which way, funding a Greenpeace campaign against Bitcoin. They funded Kamala Harris's campaign. So them now coming in at the 11th hour saying, oh, yeah, we love Trump. It's all quite rich. I think we should discriminate, the good version of discriminate. We should be very thoughtful about what is a strategic asset and what isn't. And Bitcoin is a strategic asset. Others, I don't believe, would be the right fit for a government strategic reserve. That's my opinion.
Yeah, what you said that really stood out to me was that the strategic asset should be governed by rules, not rulers. I think that's the perfect description of the ethos of a strategic asset. XRP, there's, probably hundreds of thousands of XRP owners out there, but the truth of the matter is Brad Garlinghouse controls Ripple, which controls by extension the cryptocurrency and the supply and demand dynamics of the cryptocurrency. And by the same logic, if we're going to have the United States government buy other cryptocurrencies that are centralized in that manner, why wouldn't they also buy stocks in the Magnificent Seven? There's just really no argument to be made that anything but a decentralized currency that nobody controls should be a part of the Bitcoin strategic reserve. So we also know that there have yet to be any official announcements as to what that strategic reserve will hold. But I think there's a really strong argument that needs to be made in the coming weeks that it should be Bitcoin only. And of course, it sounds like the United States also owns other cryptocurrencies that it's confiscated from illicit actors. And maybe there's a case to be made that it makes sense to hold on to some of those in hopes that they'll appreciate. But there's Bitcoin and there's crypto. And I think it took me some time in the cryptocurrency world to understand that those two are very distinct. And Bitcoin is the king cryptocurrency. You can't come for the crown without getting your head lopped off. And that is what Bitcoin is. So I'm with you as well, Brian. It seems to make sense to me. And for the legitimacy of the industry, I think it's a bad look to push for other cryptocurrencies that aren't Bitcoin in this specific case. Not to say that other cryptocurrencies don't have their uses, but in this specific case, if we're talking about a time-tested store of value, I see nothing other than Bitcoin as being the cryptocurrency that we should look at.
Yeah, I 100%. I think there's a lot of support for that concept. I think I think our friend Pierre referred to it as like a DEI idea of diversity in
Yeah.
in assets in the reserve, and it's just not it's not as good an idea for the U.S. government to be holding diverse crypto assets. And Bitcoin and crypto are not synonyms. There's Bitcoin and there's crypto. So, like we said, we don't have to beat a dead horse, but a truly decentralized asset with a hard supply cap does make sense as a strategic asset. A marketing gimmick for a private company does not. That's my view.
Amen to that. Well, Brian, let's before we move on to the next topic, let's dig a little deeper into SAB 121 because that really is a huge deal that I think was overshadowed by the other planks of the crypto EO last week. But SAB 121 will truly change the game for crypto custody in big banks in America and small, medium-sized banks as well. So, Brian, if you were to explain the significance of SAB 121 being rescinded to, say, my grandma, how do you explain it in the most basic terms possible?
Sure. So SAB 121, here's the headline. It made it impossible for your grandma to call her bank and say, my grandson says that I should own some Bitcoin. I would like for you, Mr. Banker, to custody it for me. It made it virtually impossible for the financial institutions to do that for their customers. And it was impossible because it made the bank declare its customers' liabilities or its customers' assets, pardon me, as a liability on its balance sheet, and to have total reserve backup for that, and to basically bear the risks of their customers' assets. That is not normal. That is not the way banking is supposed to work. If the bank is custodying the customer's asset, it should be the customer's asset. So the fact that the SEC revoked this rule means that now your grandma can call her bank and say, my grandson said he has a really good idea that I should hold a little bit of Bitcoin, and I would like for you to custody it for me. Now we're getting to a place where they can do that. It's going to increase adoption of Bitcoin. It is going to increase financial institutions' involvement with it. It's going to increase demand. It's going to increase the liquidity of it. it makes sense for everyone involved to get rid of this stupid rule that was, I mean, misguided is a very kind word to describe it. Um, and it was just born, as far as we can tell, born out of hostility to the very idea of Bitcoin, that there could be a decentralized digital asset that people could hold themselves or have held in a bank, or, it gave the individual a lot of empowerment and autonomy. And I think politicians who have a top-down command and control view of the world didn't like it. And I think that was the real reason for the rule. And it's a good thing that it is now been ripped away by this new administration. It's a great development for the Bitcoin ecosystem and for customers all over the world.
Yeah. Let's pull up some of the graphics that compare and contrast SAB 121 versus SAB 122. So you mentioned liability reporting. It used to be that banks had to, as you mentioned, list crypto as a liability on their balance sheet, but now they only have to list the risk of loss. And so it goes through and it compares just how much more beneficial this new order is for banks in particular. And if we could go to the next graphic, something I want to point out is that there's been massive bipartisan opposition against SAB 121 for quite some time now, including from Senator Gillibrand. Senator Gillibrand is a champion of the cryptocurrency industry and just giving it a fair shake. And this was back in May when we went to the Digital Chamber Summit. Senator Gillibrand herself said that SAB 21 is, quote, a very destructive rule, and it's trying to eliminate the ability of cryptocurrencies to participate in the marketplace. So she didn't mince any words there. And she herself pointed out that this rule was a mess and that it should be revoked as soon as possible. So what this means now is that the bankers are coming and they will come in full force. Let's look at some quotes from this last week about what some of the big bank CEOs have said about the significance of this rule. So this is the Bank of America CEO. He says, if the rules come in and make crypto a real thing you can actually do business with, you'll find that the banking system will come in hard. Not just that the banking system will dip their toes in it, but that they'll come in hard. And then we also have the Morgan Stanley CEO saying that they too would figure out how they can offer crypto services in a safe way if the rules are right. And now they are right with SAB 122. And then finally, we have a quote from the CEO of Goldman Sachs: if the world changes, we can have a discussion about Bitcoin and custodying Bitcoin. So big day for the industry, big day for banks across the country, big day for people like my grandma, who I'm still in the process of orange pilling, but she'll be happy to know that should she buy Bitcoin, she'll be able to custody it with her bank now. So a lot happening there, and also a lot happening, just shifting gears a little bit, on the energy front. Amidst a flurry of executive orders that Trump signed last week, he also issued a national energy emergency. And Brian, you and I, we wrote an op-ed for Real Clear Politics about why Trump needed to declare a national energy emergency in the first place. Can you walk us through some of the main points of our op-ed? Why was this hyperbole to call it a national energy emergency, or do you feel like that's fitting for the circumstances that we saw?
No, I think it's fitting because the through line of the main failures, or several of the main failures of the Biden administration, is energy policy. So Biden killed the Keystone XL pipeline, imposed nearly impossible standards on energy producers. We had states like California mandating electric vehicles and stopping connections for natural gas and other fossil fuels, thereby mandating an increase in demand and a decrease in supply, which of course created a total disaster for that state. We saw energy is the base layer of everything and can cause prices to go up or down. We believe Biden's energy policies contributed significantly to high inflation. It doesn't stop there, though. It goes to Europe. It goes to the Middle East. Russia invaded Ukraine because it was, well, for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons they were able to do it is because of spiking oil prices, because the US was holding back somewhat its exports to Western Europe. Trump warned Germany about this when he was president the first time, saying you have to get off Russian oil and gas. You should be importing from America. because essentially you're funding your own demise if you're doing this. When oil prices spiked, Russia was a beneficiary. They uh, made outsized profits and had their country on firmer financial footing so that they could launch an invasion of Ukraine. Likewise, Iran, Trump had basically bankrupted Iran. When Biden loosened the sanctions and allowed them to sell more oil into the market, they were able to fund the Hamas attacks on Israel and created the other conflict in the Middle East. So bad energy policy has led to higher prices for Americans. It's led to a land war in Europe, and it's led to violence and death in the Middle East. It is not an exaggeration to call it an emergency. So, drill, baby, drill is a very catchy slogan, but it's much more than that. If the US could be supplying itself and its allies with energy for generations at low cost, and that would tame inflation, it would increase our influence in the world and decrease the prospect of violence in the world. It really is an emergency. I mean, Trump's main reasons for winning, I think a lot of analysts are saying that inflation was a key one. Energy, he recognizes, is a key driver of whether or not we have high inflation. Um, Ending endless wars and reinstituting peace through strength. Energy is a key plank in getting us where we need to be there. So he's absolutely right to declare an energy emergency. And if the US is going to lead on crypto and AI, which we've just been talking about, it needs data center infrastructure and it needs more dispatchable power, natural gas, nuclear. We have to be all the above, and we have to put the accelerator down to the floor and get this going. Because as new Treasury Secretary Bessent said at his confirmation hearing, we're in an energy race. China is building 100 coal plants. They're building nuclear facilities at a breathtaking speed. Our competition is competing with us, whether we like it or not. So it's time to hit the gas pedal, uh, pun intended, and put our country on firmer footing and take power simultaneously away from our adversaries. That's what this is about. The American economy and world peace. So it is an emergency, and it's great that Trump issued this order.
I think that's the perfect summary of the op-ed. And as you mentioned, as Secretary Bassett mentioned, we're in an energy race. And you mentioned the nuclear power plants that China's going to bring online. In addition to that, they're bringing online 100 coal power plants. And so our enemies have zero qualms whatsoever about whether the energy they use is clean or dirty, so to speak. That's not to say that we shouldn't also take into consideration the impacts on the environment. That's important. But at the same time, we talk in our op ed about Texas, about how Texas is one of the states that was no discriminator of end use of energy or the type of energy being used to build out their energy infrastructure. And as a consequence of that decision, they actually have the cleanest energy mix in the country. They are the home of solar and of wind power in the United States. And it's in large part because they didn't discriminate against fossil fuels. They recognize that fossil fuels are, in fact, a critical component in scaling up renewable energy sources. So it's that all of the above approach that Texas has taken that we need to see scaled all across the country if we're going to win in that energy race. And that's something really important that I think Democrats on the Hill need to recognize, that this is not a time to be excluding anybody in terms of energy. This is really an existential moment for our country. If we lose the AI race to China, that could have enduring impacts for the next several decades on our ability to compete globally. And so this is a must-win race that we can't dilly-dally in the meantime and be wringing our hands about renewables when we just need to scale up energy, period. End of story. So I'm glad we were able to, oh yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say on that point about renewables. I mean, there's a scene in Landman. If you haven't watched Landman, it's a great show. And there's a scene where Billy Bob Thornton is introducing a eco-friendly lawyer to wind turbines and saying, how much in fossil fuels and oil and gas do you think it took to get the concrete out here and pour the concrete and put these rigs up and get these things going. And he pointed out that, the reason we drill, it's a dangerous job. The reason we are continuing to harvest oil and gas is not because we're doing it for fun. It's because there's so much demand. And every product, I mean, so many products that we touch every single day require it to create them. So, like you said, the all of the above approach has actually led to the cleanest grid in the country by not hamstringing oil and gas. They're going to be a critical component of our country's economy for generations. We don't have a viable alternative at this point. We still need it, and we have to recognize that reality. And with China at a breakneck pace racing against us in all these technologies that require a lot of energy, we cannot unilaterally disarm. We just got to hit the gas pedal.
Yeah, as simple as that. Well, a lot to unpack there. Also, a lot to unpack with the first White House press briefing yesterday. Brian, you saw an old colleague of yours in Caroline Leavitt, who's the new White House press secretary. She wowed audiences with really what was a rock star performance in her first go around as in this new position as the White House press secretary. And let's watch this first clip where she introduces an idea that's really kind of revolutionary for the White House briefing room.
And in keeping with this revolutionary media approach that President Trump deployed during the campaign, the Trump White House will speak to all media outlets and personalities, not just the legacy media who are seated in this room. Because according to recent polling from Gallup, Americans' trust in mass media has fallen to a record low. Millions of Americans, especially young people, have turned from traditional television outlets and newspapers to consume their news from podcasts, blogs, social media, and other independent outlets. It's essential to our team that we share President Trump's message everywhere and adapt this White House to the new media landscape in 2025.
Wow, big news there. So Caroline Leavitt is breaking up the big media cartel by essentially opening the doors of the briefing room to everybody, including new media, not just the old media that has dominated really for decades. So Brian, can you unpack for us the significance of that announcement and also give us some more information about Caroline Leavitt, because I know you worked with her for a long time.
Yeah, I want to first say congratulations to Caroline. She did a great job. We worked together at the White House. She helped me on a number of issues, was always a hard worker, eager to learn, an excellent messenger. So it was wonderful to see her make this leap up to press secretary and do such a great job advocating on behalf of the president. This announcement is fantastic because one of, I would say, sort of our Achilles heels in the first administration was that the media cartel was still very powerful at that time. And there were fake news stories after fake news story. I mean, the Charlottesville hoax was still prevalent. The suckers and losers hoax, where I was releasing, I think, the 27th statement from an eyewitness who was with President Trump on that trip to Europe, where they claimed he called war veterans suckers and losers. It was completely made up. It was totally fake. So it of course was published by the Atlantic and then carried by CNN and all these networks, ad nauseum. So fighting against this behemoth, the totally fake news narratives about illegal immigration that were constant, about tax cuts being for the wealthy when they really were distributed to low and middle income, much more than high earners. There were so many. The list is too long. The Russia hoax, which was perpetuated for years. So power needed to be taken away from the legacy media. President Trump did that in the campaign by reaching millions, especially young people, through podcasts and other alternative means, and really democratizing information about our politics and our government. And so it makes perfect sense that now that they're in a position to govern, they have to advance policies. They have to inform the American people about what they're doing. They have to fight fake news. They need to be inviting other messengers, other carriers of information into the briefing room. This is a great idea. It is also building on something that we did in the Trump White House, where we invited other media outlets that did not have one of those legacy seats in the briefing room occasionally to ask questions, either by video or they could stand in the back of the room and ask questions. So we had tried to open it up a little bit. She's just taken the wall off the room and inviting everybody who wants to convey information about the administration, come to us, ask for a credential, we'll give you a question. It is excellent. Again, taking power away from outlets that were unfair, democratizing the delivery of information. It's a great idea, and I'm glad she's doing it.
Yeah, and I think whether they realize it or not, it's good for legacy media too to have competition. I think it will sharpen their skills and hopefully push them to be more fair and to give the American people a better product, because the product that they've been feeding us for the last decade has been absolute trash. You know, in that opening statement, Caroline Leavitt mentioned Gallup data about trust in media, and it made me want to dig deeper as to what is that Gallup data. Can you pull up that chart, Dylan? I was blown away by this. Americans' trust in mass media is at an all-time low of 31%. So not even 1 in 3 Americans trust the media today. That is a damning report for legacy media companies everywhere. And you think they would be quickly learning their lesson in light of the shifting media landscape, but it seems like they are committed to making the same old mistakes. And we saw that this last week with a huge story from New York Magazine. Let's pull this up. New York Magazine did a story on the inauguration festivities here in DC last weekend. And this is the headline, "The Cool Kids Table." And as you can see there, well, if I'm looking at this magazine without seeing the headline, I just think, well, that's a lot of hot people there. What group are they a part of? Turns out they're all MAGA Americans. But this is what is so, I think, disillusioning about this kind of story is not only the framing, which is so obviously biased and so obviously cruel in and of itself, but look at what they did with this actual story. If you can go to the next graphic, Dylan, this actually shows that the author of this piece says, have you noticed the entire room is white? So first of all, that's a lie right there, because look at the cropping of this photo. They deliberately cropped out several African-American MAGA supporters here in an attempt to portray the MAGA movement as all white and very racist, which is so passé. I mean, they've been doing this for the past 8 years. Nobody believes it anymore, especially when Trump picked up huge gains in all minority communities, both in 2020 and in 2024. So it's the same old playbook, but it's not working anymore. It reminds me of when you go back and watch football tape from the 1950s, all they do is run the ball over and over and over. But football evolved with the West Coast offense, and now it's primarily a passing game. I think Democrats and their media counterparts don't recognize that they're using an old playbook that doesn't work anymore. And the good news is their businesses will fail if they continue on that route. But Brian, I'm curious what you make of this. As Caroline Leavitt pointed out and Gallup validated, trust in mass media is at an all-time low. Let's say you were made the CEO of a legacy media company, be it an NBC or PBS or CBS, one of these big companies that's been around for decades, and you were charged to make this company not only survive, but thrive in the digital age. What would you do? How can they compete? And do you think they actually can compete with more nimble startup media companies and individual podcasters and content creators?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, I would abandon these ridiculous tropes that are not based at all, in fact, and are just offensive, and you're just creating enemies. It is a market-based business. You want more viewers, you want more advertisers, you want people to trust you. I want to know who the hell these 31% are, because I figured it would be down around, the John McCain quote of, relatives and paid staffers at this point as the only people who actually trusted. My view is that truth is stranger and more interesting than fiction. So go, attend events, interview real people, just convey the message. If you are an honest delivery mechanism of information that is interesting, people will consume it. And that's why we've seen, Joe Rogan become the #1 podcast in the entire world, because he just has smart people on and they have long conversations about really important subjects. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You can be a MMA announcer and former Fear Factor host. This isn't rocket science. So uh, tell the truth, find the interesting stories, and deliver them. Knock it off with the BS narrative, marriage to these stupid narratives and partisanship. Trump's Republican Party is all over the map. People have found it attractive because he wants America to win. He's patriotic. He wants businesses to succeed. People want to keep their jobs and they want to know that they are on the winning team and they want America to be the winning team. So just tell the truth and tell interesting stories that actually exist. You don't have to make it up. You really don't. So that's kind of the starting point. And people aren't afraid. Clips and short form is obviously very popular, but people aren't afraid of deep dives either. I think there's this distrust of the population. I think a lot of people in legacy media organizations just assume people are stupid and incurious, and that is not at all true. People are generally pretty smart and pretty curious. So give them the information that they're craving and you will succeed. Continue down this road of partisan narrative nonsense, you will fail. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Brian, I wonder as well if these legacy companies are actually constrained by their own medium. You've done a lot of cable hits recently, and in each one, you have to get a point across in a matter of 10 to 30 seconds. And that's extremely difficult to do, especially when people in our world, you and I, we consume a lot of our media through podcasts where we're not listening to 30-second clips, we're listening to 3-hour-long conversations. Do you think that these companies are constrained by the medium and for that reason alone that they might go the way of the dinosaur, might go the way of the radio and the way that TV killed the radio star? I'm curious your thoughts on that front.
To an extent, but it can be adapted. I mean, there are, you see right now, you only see kind of long form interviews with President Trump or with other world leaders on some kind of, news magazines or what have you. I think maybe networks giving more of a chance to some of the great innovators of our time. I mean, look at Trump's inauguration. He's got really good instincts in terms of, reading the culture, and politics, flows downhill from culture. Andrew Breitbart famously said, if a network, instead of just feeding me a bunch of sound bites that are kind of boring and don't really educate me, they decided, all right, we're going to devote, an episode a week or something to following around Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg and digging into some of these topics. I think people will be interested in that, So I just think that the medium as it exists today is contributing to its decline, and that requires thoughtfulness and innovation. And I think it's at our fingertips if they want to try new things, and that's what I would recommend. It doesn't have to die. There's still a lot of people who have cable. I still have cable, even though I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's not an either or proposition at this point. I mean, look at Netflix. Like the Netflix business. I have Netflix, whatever. They really are just throwing spaghetti against the wall. There has to be some gatekeeping in terms of quality of the content, which I don't think Netflix is doing right now.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff, but you have to find it like a needle in a haystack. I think if a media outlet were to, maybe have a brainstorming session, you get 100 ideas, pick the best 10 things to like dive deeper on, I think they might build better audiences that way.
I do too. You also look at the exiles of legacy media and how their exile was maybe one of the best things to happen to them. Two people come to mind: Glenn Greenwald, who broke the Edward Snowden story. I believe he was a New York Times reporter, if I'm not mistaken, before he went off and became an independent journalist. And then you also have Megyn Kelly. I mean, these are two of the biggest stars in the podcast space. And I think they're strengths as podcasters is that they brought with them that journalistic rigor that they used throughout their career in legacy media, and they applied that to the podcast world in a way that other podcasters just haven't. And they are two of the most listened to people in America and honestly across the world when it comes to American policy and politics. So if I'm the CEO of a legacy media company, I would pick maybe my top journalists, my rock stars, and I would say, hey, go start a podcast. And it can be without constraints, it can be hours long conversations. But I think that's just one small way that they can keep themselves relevant. And if they fail to do so, then I do think that they will go the way of radio stations and old media that really isn't as relevant anymore. I mean, radio still exists, of course, but so few people listen to it. And so those are my thoughts on that subject. And whether the media changes or not, the Trump administration is committed to nurturing this new media landscape and to helping these upstart podcasters and independent journalists along. And to go with that, Caroline Levitt, I think she'll champion a lot of those smaller creators, and she'll do great at her job. I think this was one of the funniest and most baller tweets I saw yesterday about Caroline Levitt's performance. Someone asked her about a binder, and she says, "My binder is my head." For those who may not recall, Biden's press secretary would bring a massive 7-inch binder to every press briefing, and you would see many clips of her leafing through it, just trying to find the right subject. And Caroline Levitt here didn't need any binder. I don't know if she even had that many notes at all, and she was just able to use it from her head. It is a reflection of the authenticity of the Trump team and of Trump himself. I mean, the man talks off the cuff. Whether you love it or hate it, you know that what he's saying is what he truly thinks. And so we're in a new era as far as the American media landscape goes, and it's an exciting time to be alive. Very exciting.
Yeah, a few things. I think, well, Glenn Greenwald, I believe, founded The Intercept and then left The Intercept because it was becoming too ideological and, married to the left. And they kind of had a falling out. And yeah, now he's a brand in his own right. Megyn Kelly, of course, was at Fox, went to NBC, got fired under, I think it seemed to be pretextual reasons. I mean, I think it just didn't work out, but she's now getting better ratings than any cable news station just on her own with like 5 or 6 staff. And the shows that she had hosted before would have, 100 staff or something. Tucker is another one, he's let go by Fox News, worked at several cable news outlets, now has a booming media enterprise of his own, including a podcast. It's a whole new world now, and I think people are thirsty for independent voices who are just going to tell them the truth. On the binder, Kayleigh McEnany, who was the press secretary when Caroline and I worked in the press office in the first Trump administration. Kayleigh was a big fan of the binders. It helped her organize her thoughts. She was very meticulous with it, and she would hear the beginning of a question from a reporter, which she would take as a prompt to then get her to the information that she needed so that she could have it in front of her. That was her style. I think it's a style choice. If Kayleigh felt, I think, emboldened and strengthened by the binder, I think Caroline maybe would have felt inhibited by it. I think she wants to have more of a conversational style, and obviously that worked. Her first briefing was a smashing success. So it's a personal choice, and I think this one works for her. But the binder is in my head quote is very baller. I love it. She also was really I saw it circulating when she got that question about illegal aliens with criminal records, and she said, well, they're all criminals because they broke the law by coming into our country illegally. I mean, how refreshing that somebody's actually willing to say it. I think in the past people would walk on eggshells because of what we talked about, because of the power of the legacy media. Somebody would know they'd get raked over the coals. Whereas now, with X owned by Elon and all the independent media that's very powerful, she knows that that's going to be, she's going to get support from outside that room to back up what she's saying because she knows it's true. And that's why the sea change that we're seeing is just so critically important. People want the truth. And and people innovated now to deliver it. So great developments.
Yeah, huge. One other point that I just remembered while you were talking, Brian, is her authenticity and honesty when it came to the New Jersey drones question. That's something we've talked about on this podcast before. For those who may not recall, there were hundreds of drone sightings in New Jersey over the last few weeks, and the Biden administration wouldn't give the American people a straight answer as to what was going on. And of her own accord, Caroline Leavitt mentioned yesterday that the drones were government testing. It was all FAA authorized. And so it was just a moment of refreshing transparency, which I think is in keeping with President Trump's commitment to opening up a lot of the classified files that have been sealed and hidden from the American people for decades, such as the JFK files. I wouldn't be surprised to see them open up some of the UFO files as well. So it was just nice to see that level of transparency come from the White House press office, because it's a level of transparency that was completely missing for the last 4 years, while the White House press secretary was essentially hiding from the American people that the American president was in the late stages of aging and maybe even had dementia for all we know. So it's really nice to have a White House press secretary who clearly has direct access to the president in a way that the previous one didn't under Biden. So again, like you said, we're in a new world. It's an exciting time. Another sign of the new season we're in right now is the invite you got from Congress to testify next week about a really important subject. Brian, can you give us a sense of what you're going to be doing around this time next Thursday?
Well, so there's nothing official yet, nothing set in stone. So I don't want to get over my skis, but both the Senate Banking Committee and a House Oversight Subcommittee are looking at debanking, which is great. I'm very glad they're looking at this. President Trump talked about this recently. He called out the Bank of America CEO for debanking conservatives. Bank of America and JP Morgan immediately came out saying, no, we don't. But there'll be a plethora of examples of people come out and say, yes, I was debanked, and it was for political reasons. When I was at the Treasury Department, companies would come to me and say, AOC or some far left politician doesn't like my business, and our bank closed our account because they're afraid of reputational risk or pressure from regulators. We now know that there was a report about Operation Choke Point 1.0. We now know that Operation Choke Point 2.0 is happening with respect to Bitcoin and crypto related companies. Perfectly legal businesses in the United States were having their accounts closed, and it was because of this kind of fear of reputational risk and or pressure from the regulators. With our industry, the Fed, OCC, and FDIC issued a statement saying that we think digital assets are inconsistent with safety and soundness in the banking system, which, of course, it wasn't a rulemaking. There was no public comment. It wasn't pursuant to a statute. It was just this regulation by press release, which scared the heck out of every bank. And they started calling their customers that had anything to do with Bitcoin or crypto and saying, I guess we have to close your account. So it was happening. It was political. It was about protecting legacy, government and big business power at the expense of innovators. So this is a scandal, full stop, and it needs to be investigated, and Congress needs to prevent it from ever happening again. So I'm very glad that both the House and the Senate are looking into this and holding hearings. So I know the House hearing will be on Thursday. The Senate Banking Committee announced a hearing as well. Senator Tim Scott, who's the chairman, invited companies to report to him on their experiences with debanking so that they can really get to the bottom of this and prevent it from ever happening again. So two hearings coming up. There's a chance that I'll be a witness at one of them, but more to come on that.
Yeah. Well, stay tuned. It's really exciting, and it's just refreshing that the American people are going to hear the whole story. For so long, Operation Choke Point 2.0 was a buzzword that floated around Bitcoin Twitter, but didn't really leave that echo chamber. But now it's left quarantine. Operation Choke Point 2.0, debanking, all these words that have been familiar to us for a couple of years now are now becoming familiar to the American people as well. And so it's good to see that progress. To close this out today, we always have our grab bag section, and I'll just get to mine real quick. My grab bag, or something that I thought from this week was funny and noteworthy, was the New York Post headline about the tariff kerfuffle over the weekend, a new tariff in town. So for those who didn't follow, Donald Trump this last week, he pretty much put the Colombian president in his corner. The president of Colombia tried to deny entry of his own citizens into Colombia. And when he did this, these are illegal immigrants that Donald Trump was sending back to their home country. When the president of Colombia did this, from my understanding from the golf course, Donald Trump issued a series of Truth Social posts in which he announced his intention to enact a number of heavy tariffs against Colombia. And the Colombian president folded within a few hours of those Truth Social posts going live. They are accepting those illegal immigrants back into their country, as they should. And the media tried to make it sound like no one was going to be able to afford coffee anymore because of what Trump had tweeted. However, it was all resolved in an afternoon from the golf course. So it takes a really unique cowboy of a president to be able to conduct economic statecraft from the 8th hole of a golf course. And that's exactly what President Trump did. And shout out to New York Post. They've been around since the days of Alexander Hamilton. So they've had hundreds of years to perfect their puns, but man, nobody does it like them. I love a new tariff in town was the best headline I saw all of last week. So Brian, that's my grab bag for last week. Anything you want to touch on before we close out today?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually on that item, there was a great tweet that JD Vance retweeted about, like, let me give you a sense of how this would normally work in the government. There would be some, low-level meeting where they'd talk about how best to respond. Then there would be a higher level meeting. They would talk about how best to respond. Then they'd put together 3 options or something. They would then circulate through an interagency process. And some agency would get mad at it and say, no, we have to have a 4th option that's not actually going to accomplish anything, but doesn't offend anybody. So then they'll have a meeting with the White House chief of staff, and then they'll go over options. Then they'll meet with the president, and the president ultimately will only hear some milquetoast, boring, ineffective proposal. And here we are a month later, and we already have a problem. Here, the president tweets from the golf course, and it's over.
Like
This
that.
is what leadership looks like. It's great. I want to dig into DeepSeek. I want to go deep on DeepSeek because this is the big news of the day. Chinese company, and it came out today that Alibaba also has an AI tool. DeepSeek is an AI tool that a Chinese company claims that it created. It's almost as good as ChatGPT, but they only spent $6 million and they built it really quickly. And so, Trump's announcement of $500 billion in investment in AI in the US, this was an attempt, I think, by China to say anything you can do, we can do better and cheaper, and we're winning, basically. I don't trust those numbers as far as I can throw them. I think they excluded prior research. I think they likely used other existing tools and kind of sucked the knowledge out of them and did an end around. I do think, though, it is a shot across the bow. I think it is a wake-up call for the United States, a kick in the pants, that our adversaries are competing with us whether we like it or not. It is time to accelerate. And I think that even if it's true that they were able to create a very useful tool for cheaper and in compliance with export controls, if that's true, okay, great. Then the Stargate $500 billion project may be able to create very useful tools for a lot less money and a lot faster, which means better returns. And it means they can redeploy that capital to create newer and better products, and we can advance the entire ecosystem faster. Efficient deployment of capital is a good thing. But I think this highlights that over the last 4 years, we had the Biden EO, which is over 100 pages of onerous regulations. We saw the Mark Andreessen's account of his meetings with the White House, that they wanted to just control the space. They didn't want any new startups. They wanted to focus on the big players, the Microsofts and OpenAIs, and the big companies with whom they had relationships, so they could really keep their thumb on AI development. And they got, bogged down. Instead of measuring, success and accuracy and user experience, they wanted to measure DEI metrics. So we wound up with Black George Washington, and Google had to start over with the
Yeah.
AI project. It was totally ridiculous meddling by the government. And here we have Trump coming in saying, what do you need? I want America to win. And he revoked the Biden EO right away. And he appointed David Sachs to advise him on how to help foster the industry in the US. So total sea change, absolutely needed. I was very pleased to discuss this on Maria Bartiromo's show this morning, Mornings with Maria on Fox Business Network. And I said as much that, I don't trust the numbers from China, but efficient deployment of capital is good. And this is a wake-up call. It's time for us to hit the gas. And she asked me about the crypto EO, which we already talked about. And she asked me about Riot and our activities and how we're going to grow. The company announced that we're looking at, HPC, AI potential deals because we have such a robust power portfolio, in addition to the Bitcoin focus of the business. And regardless, I told Maria, Trump is right to put in his new AI EO, his new crypto EO, and his national energy emergency. Because if we're going to successfully compete, we need more data centers and we need more power. We need nuclear and we need nat gas. So that is my grab bag segment. Going deep on DeepSeek, news of the day, was very disrupting to the markets. A lot of value got sucked out of the market because of this announcement. People thought AI investing was too frothy when this announcement came out. But like I said, efficient deployment of capital is good. I think the market reaction was overblown. I think there will be a bounce back. And I think the US is going to wake up and start to compete.
Yeah, it was interesting seeing the market react in the way that it did, because it reminded me of the gloom and doom, sky is falling mentality that we often see in Bitcoin and crypto whenever there's a slight market downturn. So as someone coming from the Bitcoin world and seeing how the AI world was reacting to that news, my thought was, oh, it's just another Monday in crypto.
Yeah, put on your seatbelt and hodl.
Yeah, just hodl. And I do believe that that will be the strategy for the United States going forward, not only when it comes to Bitcoin, but when it comes to AI. I mean, it's going to be a rocky, volatile ride, but we got to see it through to the very end, because it's a matter of national security and maintaining American competitiveness in the 21st century. So yeah, it's a really interesting unfolding story. We'll see if more information comes out as to whether or not DeepSeek really did somehow use more chips than they purported to use. So really interesting things going on this last week. DeepSeek, the crypto EO, a new White House press secretary. Brian, is there anything else we want to touch on before we close out today, or does that about round up today's program?
That about rounds it up. I also see that Trump's media company is starting to adopt a Bitcoin and crypto treasury strategy. So he's putting his money where his mouth is, with state governments, the US government, other foreign governments looking at a strategic reserve. I think that's a bullish signal.
Yeah, there we go. And Rumble, who we stream with, who helps us out every week. Thank you. And shout out to Dylan. They too have started looking into Bitcoin as well and putting it on their balance sheet, from my understanding. So very exciting news. Forward thinking companies out there will continue to do this. And I think they'll reap the benefits over the next several years as Bitcoin continues to appreciate in value and more people wake up to its use cases. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Like and subscribe. Please don't forget to do that. And if you didn't like what you heard here, just go on your merry way, please. But give us a listen again next week as well.
And follow us on Twitter at Sam Lyman33, or on X, sorry, at Sam Lyman33, at Morgan Stern NJ. And we'll see you next time on the Peer to Peer Policy Pod.